Hey there and welcome to another skill tutorial. In this one I'm going to be going through the skills Frost Armor, Drake and Mana Bolts. I'm going to jump right in and go to Frost Armor. Frost Armor is all about the defense buff. So this armor increase of 300% is actually more like a 2.5 times your armor. It's a 60% damage reduction. The reason being is you've got a 100% boost from your armor passive and then also 5% from guild bonus. So this is increasing it from 205% to 500%. So it's not like a 4 times increased armor like you may think. But either way, this is a huge defense buff, and it's basically what makes wizards tank better than archers. If you didn't have this buff on, you're only going to tank as well as an archer, which means you're going to die off really easily. Archers have a decoy to help them survive, but this is basically the wizard's way of surviving. And for that reason, it's very important to have on all the time. Thankfully, the duration is 20 seconds and the cooldown is 30 seconds, and after cooldown reduction stuff, this is actually more like 24 seconds. You can see 23 here, but basically 24 seconds, and with a 20-second duration, this is going to be on almost constantly. So it's brilliant for doing that, and you want to have this on almost every build you do. Well, I say almost, literally every single build you should put this on, because you need it. And anytime when this isn't on, you can die very easily. So I'm going to talk about the skill points first of all, because putting this up to 99 skill points, what this does is it massively increases the armor increase. However, it also reduces the cooldown, the duration, from 20 seconds down to 10 seconds. So it means that window where you don't have it on increases dramatically, and even though it becomes a really good defense buff for a short time, you end up with a big period of time where you can die very easily. You do not want to do this. It's basically it's never ever the case that you want to do this. Sorry, I messed up my words there. It's almost never the case that you want to do this. There are only a few unique cases where you may want to increase the armor buff on this and increase the window where you don't have it on. But basically, you want to put this at 10 out of 99 and then stick with that, and just always make sure you reapply this when you can. So that's what this skill does, and then it also has some extra effects, and in fact that's what the Screw-ins add. They don't really increase the damage reduction or anything like that. They add extra effects. So the base skill has an effect that enemies get slowed. Unfortunately, I can't show this because the enemies just die when they hit me, but basically it's a 50% slow for a few seconds. It's very useful actually, surprisingly useful, although ultimately you do want to go with Screw-ins. The Screw-ins, I would say, are less important to do if you've just started out and you're looking at which Screw-ins to level up. These are less important than Screw-ins on other skills, so do leave these till later. But the kind of Screw-ins you have on this are things which do damage, and then ones which add some healing. That's what we have so far. There may be ones later on that do extra effects, but basically you're looking at these extra effects and what they're adding to it, rather than anything else. So just quickly talking about the damage skill here, it may look like it does loads of damage. However, none of the damage on this skill crits. And the reason why they've done that is because this skill they want to have as a defense skill rather than a damage skill. So whatever damage numbers you're seeing, expect them to be actually not that much when you get into combat. The reason why this does damage is this is a farming Screw-in. So you'll see here when I go up to the enemies and I put this on, it creates a huge area around me, and it hits all the enemies there and deals damage to them. They just instantly die as soon as I get close, and it means it's insanely good for farming. You want to be using this on every farming build you do. Well, I say farming build. Basically, you create one farming build, don't you? So yeah, basically you want to do this and then just run through the enemies. It's how you farm really quickly. They're excellent for that. However, in combat and stuff, they're not going to be that useful. And then you have ones like Spirit Armor here, which gives you a heal every few seconds and roots enemies rather than slowing them. So that root effect is a bit more useful in PvP, and then the healing is kind of handy. I typically use Spirit Armor everywhere outside of farming because it's just a useful extra benefit on the skill. And then Crystal Armor in farming, that's kind of what you want to do there. So that's that skill, and kind of explaining what's going on, what you want to look at Screw-ins and stuff, and the skill points. I hope I haven't missed anything. It should be pretty clear. Just don't be confused by the damage on that. It's not actually that good. And pretty much ignore the damage and all the other Screw-ins on there. So the next skill is Drake. This is one I can show a bit more. What Drake does is it creates a little dragon thing for a few seconds. Well, I say a few seconds, a long time. but it dies quite easily, and the damage it deals is pet damage, which means it's scaled on the content you do. That means if you're weak and you're going into stuff that's quite hard for you, then the damage from it is actually going to be very good, but once you get strong, then the damage is just not that much. So what this ultimately ends up as is a skill which you can use to kind of distract enemies, keep them off you, and it gets very useful for that. So it's a kind of defense skill that you're gonna spam frequently. You want a low cooldown on it, and for that reason I would recommend not taking it beyond 10 out of 99. The damage is just not going to be that much, and increasing the cooldown is a very bad idea. There's never any case you want to take it beyond 10. So yeah, keep it at 10 out of 99, and then use it for defense. That's pretty much what you're doing with this skill. And then Skurians, they basically add elemental damage on, so you pick the one that's good for the content you're doing. Then there's certain ones which add a slow effect as well. That's quite useful for helping them survive a bit more. But yeah, it's pretty much what this skill's all about. You can use it in farming a bit, but it's not. It's only useful in farming if it has some extra effect that it does damage where it lands. And then in PvP, this is just the pet damage is almost nothing, so it's kind of got no use in PvP. So anyway, this is what it's useful for. It's a kind of defense skill when you're doing hard content and stuff. Then you've got Mana Bolts. Mana Bolts is a bit of a confusing skill, and just before I go into it, actually, the damage here, bear in mind this is at full points, so this is actually 58%. It's the same as Mana Storm here, 58% per hit. So what's confusing about this is it hits 6 bolts, and you'd think that it would be really useful for taking out groups, because if you do it, it takes out a whole group. That's great. However, the damage is actually very, very small if it splits across the groups, because what it does is it creates 6 bolts that hit an enemy. However, if there are multiple enemies, then those 6 bolts will split across them. So if there are 6 enemies, they will only do 1 bolt on each. And in fact, if there are more than 6, it will go across and hit them all with 1 bolt. But basically, the damage is only going to be 58%. And if you compare that to something like Arcane Ball, which I said in my last video, 116% isn't that much. You can imagine 58% is pathetic. So yeah, this actually, if there is a group of enemies, it does almost no damage to them, and it's useless. It's only good when there's one enemy by itself, and then you can use it and do lots of damage to that enemy because all 6 bolts hit them. So this is a kind of boss killer, or in PvP that you can use it. Now in practice, what you find in when you're fighting bosses is you can't actually get them away from all the other enemies that frequently. There's often the case that there's just loads of enemies around the boss and you can't use this skill, which means that ultimately there are other better options for PvE. I would never really use this in PvE. Well, I say I'd never really. I'd rarely use it. I mean, in PvE. Where this is really useful is in PvP, because in almost all cases you're just going to face one person alone. You can use the skill on them, and it does tons of damage to them, and all instantly. That's where this skill gets really useful, and it's all about that damage. So you want to go for Skurian, which adds the most damage for you. So basically pick the one which you're going for a build. So if you're doing like a nature build, you pick Forest Bolts. A fire build, you'd pick Flame Cannon, that kind of thing. And for that reason, because it's all about damage, it's also a really good case to get this up to full 99 points. If you max this out, it's going to do loads of damage in one hit, and you can surprise people with like finishing them off. Say that you get them down to like half health, and then you use Mana Bolts, and suddenly they just die, and they weren't able to react by healing or putting on defense buffs or anything. That's where this skill, it gets really useful. So this is a brilliant skill for PvP, but outside of that, it's just not that good. Another thing to note is the cooldown actually doesn't increase that much as you put the points into it, which is why it's an even better candidate to get to 99 points. It's what I would recommend as the second best to do after Polymorph. Mana Bolts is probably the best. The second best to get up to 99 points. So that's what this skill's about. That's what the Skurians do. And then there's some other unique ones which make it useful in other areas, but I'm not going to go into those because that overcomplicates things slightly. So it's all about damage. You're looking at the damage in the Skurians. If they add any like really interesting extra effect, then maybe consider those. But otherwise, that's what you're using it for. That's these 3 skills. I hope I've gone through everything. That's made it very clear, and you have an idea of what you're looking at on these skills. I'll see you in the next one soon.